Prince Harry's childhood was unlike any other, and yet, in many ways, it was painfully ordinary. To millions around the globe, he was the spare, a charming, mischievous prince who grew up in the shadow of a golden brother. To insiders, he was something else entirely. A boy walking a tightrope suspended between adoration and scrutiny, love and betrayal. And while the world was busy applauding his smiles at parades and waving through carriage windows, Harry was learning a lesson no amount of royal training could teach. Not everything that glitters is gold, and sometimes the people closest to you are also the ones keeping the deepest secrets. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the very start, the palace was a place of contradictions. The grandeur, the tradition, the ceremonial precision. It was intoxicating for a child who loved play, color, and freedom. But alongside the pageantry came rules, and behind the rules came whispers. Staff members spoke in hushed tones in hallways. Maids glanced over shoulders before delivering messages, and aides occasionally lingered too long, watching the young princes with the kind of attention that felt like both protection and surveillance. It was in these hallways, amid the polished floors and gilt-framed portraits, that the first seeds of Harry's unease were planted. At home, the dynamics were no less complicated. The loss of his mother, Princess Diana, left an indelible mark, creating emotional gaps that the palace tried, and often failed, to fill. Diana had been the bridge between the cold ceremonial life and the messy, emotional world beyond the palace walls. With her gone, Harry was left with a confusing mix of love, expectation, and whispers. Some whispered to him, some whispered about him, and some whispered about things he couldn't yet understand. Even as a child, Harry had a sense that there were things the adults weren't telling him. Little inconsistencies, a conversation cut off mid-sentence, a glance exchanged between staff members that seemed to hold secrets too heavy for a boy's ears, started to build a quiet suspicion. And it wasn't just the staff. The adults in the family, while well-meaning, often carried burdens that Harry couldn't know, let alone decipher. Secrets within secrets, layers upon layers of unspoken truths. As Harry grew, so did his awareness of public perception. He was taught early on that every smile, every wave, every casual glance at a camera was being recorded, analyzed, and judged. He learned that in the palace, appearances mattered more than feelings, and discretion often meant hiding not only what you knew, but what you felt. Humor became a shield. Mischief became a weapon. And yet, beneath the surface, the boy was quietly observing, storing pieces of a puzzle that would only later reveal itself in ways even he could not predict. By the time he reached his teenage years, the duality of his life had become pronounced. Publicly, he was the fun-loving prince, often photographed riding bikes, playing sports, or engaging in charity work. Privately, he was the boy who knew the palace had walls thicker than anyone outside could imagine, walls that kept truths locked inside and secrets carefully curated. Friends outside the royal orbit were rare, and trust was harder still. It was in these years that Harry began to understand one of life's cruelest lessons. The closer you are to power and privilege, the closer you are to the whispers. And among those whispers were the earliest hints of questions no one dared say aloud. In hushed tones, staff and distant relatives would murmur about future generations, the pressure of heirs, and the complicated nature of love and lineage within royal life. Harry, curious and perceptive, could pick up on the subtleties. A glance exchanged when someone mentioned the next generation. A subtle hesitation when discussing family matters. A slight change in tone that made him ask questions he didn't yet have the courage to voice. These early experiences created a foundation for what would become one of Harry's most defining traits: vigilance. He learned to watch, to listen, and to question, even when the questions felt dangerous or forbidden. It was a skill he would later use to navigate the treacherous waters of adult life, marriage, and ultimately, the revelation that would shake the royal family to its core. But childhood in the palace was not all shadows and whispers. There were moments of joy, of laughter that spilled like sunlight through the corridors. Harry and William shared adventures, pranks, and the occasional escape from royal rigidity. Harry's charm, wit, and charisma endeared him to staff and family alike. He had a natural ability to connect with people, to see them as more than the roles they played in a centuries-old institution. And yet, even in those moments of happiness, the seeds of doubt and curiosity were quietly growing. One anecdote that stands out from Harry's childhood involves a Christmas at Sandringham. The young princes were playing in the snow, their laughter echoing across the frozen gardens. Inside, the adults were deep in discussion about matters too complex for Harry to grasp: lineage, succession, and family alliances. Harry, peering through a frosted window, overheard phrases that would linger in his mind for years: questions of paternity, the next generation, unspoken truths. He didn't understand the full meaning, but he understood enough to know that some stories were hidden, that some truths were dangerous, and that some questions were never meant to be asked. This duality, joy and suspicion, love and doubt, would define Harry's early life. It created an internal tension that few could see, a tension that he carried into adulthood. And while his public image was that of a playful, rebellious prince, the private Harry was a boy learning to navigate a world where secrets were currency and whispers often carried more weight than words. It's in this crucible of secrecy, expectation, and emotional complexity that the foundation was laid for the revelation that would later shock the world. Harry's childhood, rich with love yet shadowed by unanswered questions, made him uniquely prepared, or perhaps uniquely burdened, to confront truths that no one else could face. And yet, for all the lessons he learned as a boy, nothing could have prepared him for the moment when he would realize that some whispers were not just rumors, but signals of a reality far more complex and unsettling than he had ever imagined. As Harry stepped into adulthood, carrying the weight of a nation's gaze and the legacy of his family, the questions that had quietly haunted him in the corridors of palaces and behind closed doors were about to become impossible to ignore. Secrets that had simmered for decades were nearing the surface, and among them was a truth so shocking, so personal, that it would challenge everything Harry had believed about family, love, and identity. And as he turned 40, the question that had haunted him since childhood would demand an answer, one that would change not just his life, but the lives of the children he adored forever. Long before Archie or Lilibet were born, long before whispers of secrets and paternity began to creep into Harry's world, Meghan Markle entered it like a storm. Not a subtle one, not a gentle breeze that nudges a calm pond. No, Meghan was the kind of storm that topples expectations, shakes traditions, and forces even the most guarded institutions to sit up and notice. And for Harry, she was more than just a whirlwind. She was a catalyst, a mirror, and ultimately, a key player in the story that would lead to the confession the world would never forget. When Harry first saw Meghan, there was curiosity, there was charm, and there was a spark that seemed to say, "This will be complicated." He was drawn not by her royal polish, she had none, but by a rawness, a confidence, and a warmth that the palace had almost never seen. Meghan was Hollywood, yes, but she was also sharp, strategic, and aware. She knew the game, and she knew how to bend it to her advantage without ever seeming overtly ambitious. But the world, of course, didn't notice the nuances. To tabloids, Meghan was a stranger, an outsider, and a potential disruptor of centuries-old traditions. Headlines began before the couple even appeared publicly. Who is Meghan Markle? American actress shakes up royal life. The prince has met his match, or his problem. The tone was subtle at first, almost playful, but soon escalated into scrutiny, judgment, and speculation, a storm that Harry would find both exhilarating and suffocating. Their courtship was a study in contrasts. Publicly, it was a fairy tale. They were photographed skiing, laughing at charity events, and exchanging glances that seemed intimate and real. Fans adored them. Critics were suspicious. But privately, the pressures were immense. Palace aides quietly monitored interactions. Royal protocol whispered in every conversation. And behind closed doors, Harry began to notice the same subtle hesitations, half-smiles, and secretive tones that had haunted his childhood. Even in those early days, whispers about Meghan's background and intentions were floating through the corridors. She's ambitious, some said. She's here for the title, others whispered. And though Harry loved her fiercely, he began to understand that in the royal world, love alone was never enough. There was politics, there were optics, there were secrets, and there was a question that would eventually grow louder than any tabloid headline. Who can you truly trust? Humor became one of Harry's shields again. He joked about press scrutiny. He teased Meghan about the absurdity of royal rules. He found moments of laughter in an increasingly tense environment. But behind the laughter, he was observing. He was listening. And, unknowingly, he was preparing himself for the challenges that lay ahead. Challenges that no amount of charm, humor, or affection could have fully shielded him from. Meghan's entrance didn't just affect Harry's personal life. It also shook the palace machinery. Staff members who had long operated in a rhythm honed over centuries suddenly had to adapt to a new dynamic. Meghan brought her own world of ideas, independence, and style. And while some found it refreshing, others quietly resisted. The whispers began to pick up again. Subtle criticisms, doubts about loyalties, and questions about what it really meant for the future of the family. And then came the media scrutiny, unlike anything Harry had faced before. The tabloids didn't just report on Meghan. They dissected every gesture, every outfit, every word. Social media amplified the frenzy. Memes spread like wildfire. Public opinion became a battleground. And for Harry, it was both a thrill and a torment. The woman he loved was under attack, and he knew instinctively that defending her fully might come at a personal cost. It was during this period that subtle, almost imperceptible cracks in the palace's protective walls began to appear. Conversations were recorded. Leaks were planted. Rumors, some innocent, some malignant, began to swirl. The palace's traditional discretion was colliding with the immediacy of modern media, and Harry found himself in the eye of the storm. Meghan, for her part, adapted quickly. She learned the rhythms, the politics, and the hidden rules, often before Harry did. And though she was his partner, she was also, in many ways, a player in a larger game he didn't fully understand yet. Humor and emotional spikes continued to punctuate their lives. The couple had moments of pure joy. Charity events where they laughed, quiet evenings at Kensington Palace, and playful banter that reminded Harry of lighter times. But even then, the shadow of the palace and the whispering world outside loomed. And as they navigated this duality, love and scrutiny, joy and tension, Harry began to see a pattern that would later play a crucial role in the revelation about his children. Secrets rarely remain hidden, but the timing of their exposure is everything. By the time Meghan and Harry were officially engaged, the stakes had escalated. Public approval was still divided. Staff loyalty was tested. And quietly, almost invisibly, the threads of rumors and speculation about the next generation were beginning to weave themselves into Harry's consciousness. Some rumors were innocent gossip. Others hinted at deeper, more complicated truths. And while no one could yet say it aloud, the palace's whispers about lineage, ancestry, and private matters were beginning to intersect with Harry's own private doubts, the very doubts that had been planted in him as a child. It was also in this period that Harry began to notice a subtle shift in his own perception of trust. He had loved before, yes, but Meghan was different. He was captivated not just by her beauty, intelligence, or charisma, but by the way she challenged him, the way she forced him to confront his own instincts, biases, and assumptions. And in that confrontation lay both exhilaration and danger. Because love, he realized, could illuminate truths, but it could also expose vulnerabilities, secrets, and fractures that were easier to ignore when the heart was untested. And then, of course, came the unavoidable inevitability. The media speculation about family, children, and future heirs. Early whispers, subtle hints in gossip columns, ambiguous comments from palace insiders began to surface. Harry, protective of Meghan and their future, initially dismissed them. But the instincts that had been honed since childhood, the instincts shaped by a life of whispers and half-truths, told him to pay attention, to observe, to question, to prepare for a moment when love and secrecy might collide in ways he could neither predict nor control. It was a delicate balance. Harry had found someone he loved deeply, someone who challenged the rules of the world he had grown up in, and yet, he was still navigating the palace's unspoken hierarchies. Meghan's entrance had not only reshaped Harry's personal life. It had also reignited dormant questions, stirred latent suspicions, and prepared the stage for a revelation so shocking that it would eclipse every whisper he had ever heard. And behind the charm, the humor, and the media appearances, Harry was learning something critical. The palace is a place of spectacle, but also a place of shadows. Secrets are the currency. Trust is both rare and dangerous. And in the end, even the most loving relationships can be tested by forces far beyond the walls of any palace. Little did Harry know, Meghan's arrival was only the beginning. A spark that would ignite a chain of events leading to questions about lineage, loyalty, and a truth he would never forget, a truth about the children he adored.